Hello and welcome to the Entrepreneurial Edge. I'm Chris Bishop. Now, there can't be too many entrepreneurs in this world who can watch a jet fighter scrape the skies and say, I sold that. Well, this week's guest can do exactly that. A man who has started out as a reseller of South African defense equipment in 1994 with a company called the Paramount Group. In the last 2 decades, this business has grown into Africa's largest privately owned defense and aerospace business in Africa. On top of that, he's invested in oil, gas, property, retail, tourism, mining, you name it. And now he has his own private equity group. I'm talking about Ivor Ichikowitz, a South African industrialist and international businessman, the chief executive chairman, of the Paramount Group. Welcome to the studio, Ivor. So just talk a little about yourself. Now, you grew up in Springs, near Johannesburg. Just tell us a little bit about your origins, how and where you grew up.
Springs was the most amazing place. It's 70 kilometers away from Johannesburg and 100 years away in mentality, but it was the most amazing place to grow up. I grew up as a true South African child in an amazing environment with an amazing community spirit around me, but I grew up at a time when South Africa was going through some real difficult periods, and a lot of what happened to me in Springs and the experiences I had in that community shaped the rest of my life.
Name me one. Tell me one.
The community was a real South African community. It was a community where the white community lived side by side with the black community, and the black community was very much involved in our lives, and the township at that time was literally walking distance from where my home was. And as a child, I remember not completely understanding this. You know, these people were part of my life, but every night they went home to their place and there was none of them left in my place. And this never made sense to me as a South African. And as I grew up, I remember hiding under the bed with my domestic helper when she was hiding from the police who were coming to check passbooks, and she didn't have a passbook. And these are the things that formed my political consciousness, and one of the reasons why I became an activist later on in life. And I never completely understood where my political consciousness came from, because it never came from an academic approach to politics. It came from those human experiences that I had growing up in Springs.
And how long a career did you have as an activist?
You know, I arrived at Wits University as a drama student, and I arrived from the small town and arrived in Johannesburg and checked into my dorm room and went to drama school and discovered a world at Wits University that was just completely different to anything that I'd ever imagined I could experience. And I walked straight into a political hotbed that quite honestly was not what I was expecting. And slowly but surely I gravitated towards a certain direction at university, and I kind of evolved into an activist as opposed to anything else.
And at home, your father was an entrepreneur as well. How much influence did that have on you when you were growing up?
I had an amazing family life. My father is a serial entrepreneur. He is still very active, and played a huge role in my life. He was my mentor, he was my hero, he was my guide, he was the most important influence in my life, together with my late grandfather. And he was an entrepreneur who believed that you were in business so that you could create jobs, so that you could give people a chance in life. And he was one of those entrepreneurs that would run a business that didn't make money as long as it gave people jobs. And that also had a big influence in my life, and has influenced to a certain extent the way I do business. We do things slightly differently today because we actually are focused on making money, believe it or not, as much of a crime as that may be. But the truth is that a lot of my father's value system is in me and in my brothers today.
And just briefly, I mean, you say serial entrepreneur. What businesses did he go through when you were growing up?
My father was the distributor for Suzuki motorcycles in South Africa, and it was amazing to grow up with Suzuki as a religion. It taught me how a brand can become so much part of your life. And motorcycles were very much part of my life, but we were never allowed to own a motorcycle.
Oh, really?
Absolutely not.
But when you left university, you wanted to be an actor rather than an entrepreneur. What was that?
All my life, I wanted to be an actor. And I went to Wits Drama School, and I had great difficulty getting into Wits Drama School. I don't think they took people from Springs in those days. And when I eventually got into Wits Drama School, I discovered that this was, first of all, a lot of hard work. And second of all, that it was less about the acting than it was about all the stuff that was going on around the acting. And my acting career was cut short by the late, great Toby Kushlik, who was the Greta Garbo of the South African theatre industry. And through my mother-in-law, who is also an amazing lady, I met Toby Kushlik at a function. And Toby said, "Darling, come and see me, and we'll see if you qualify to join my master class." And I went to see Toby, and I was a young actor having kind of great belief in my future, and I auditioned my lungs out. And at the end of the audition, she said, "Darling," she said, "you will never be an actor." And all my hopes and aspirations were destroyed in 30 seconds. And that's the day I realized that in life, as one door closes, another door opens. Because 3 days later, she called me and asked me to come and run her production company.
But then you were on the road with a production company for 3 years, which is quite a long time.
Well, actually, I was at drama school and running the production company at the same time.
Oh, I see.
Because I realized that this drama school thing wasn't really for me, and there was there was going to be a lot more fun in the real world running the production company.
But it's a big stretch, all of a sudden, in '94, many years later, becoming an entrepreneur. And not only that, becoming an entrepreneur connected with the defense industry. It's a big, big turn.
Again, that was an evolution, and I think these things are all connected, because I had the privilege of traveling in Africa as a very young white South African. And like most young white South Africans, I was taught at school that Africa ended at the Limpopo, and that was it. And I discovered that there was this whole continent out there that had such opportunity and such potential, but it had one single major restrictor to its growth, and that was that there was no peace and there was no stability. And I realized that we had technologies in South Africa that could help these African governments create the stability that they required, because without stability, there cannot be economic development. Without stability, nobody's going to invest, not even the locals. And without peace and stability, the rest of the world wasn't going to take Africa seriously. And this is the reason that I became very interested in how I could help African governments to create strong police capability and strong defense capability. And I'm very proud of the work that we've done, because the Africa today, that we live in today, is a very different Africa to what it was in 1994.
That's a very big concept. How did you start in the small way that entrepreneurs always do seem to start?
I met a gentleman who was manufacturing landmine-protected armoured vehicles, and he told me that his business was dead because the South African Defence Force was going to reduce inside, because this whole transformation thing in South Africa was a terrible thing, because it was going to kill the defence industry and it was going to kill this industry and that industry, and his business was dead, but he had this world-beating technology that could save soldiers' lives, and this intrigued me. And slowly but surely, and I said to him, why don't we try and sell this technology abroad? And he never thought of that, because remember, South Africa had been embargoed, so there was no prospect of selling abroad. And slowly but surely, we made some major breakthroughs. We sold the equipment to the United Nations, we sold it to the Belgian military, and we even sold it to the US military. And it really was world-beating technology, because it was technology that could save soldiers' lives in the most unpleasant and difficult circumstances. And that's how I got involved.
And how difficult was it to start up? Because I was just reading through your bio before the show, and it must have been strange going to the bank and saying, well, look, actually, we've got this great armoured vehicle that's going to go all over Africa. Surely you got some sideways glances along the way.
You know, I never went to the bank, because I realized that there was no point in going to the banks. Unfortunately, one of the tragedies of Africa is that there are very few places for new upcoming entrepreneurs to go to. Very few people want to hear your story. Everybody wants to know your track record and your success record and how much money you've got in the bank, and then they'll talk to you. Our business evolved. We built value on top of value on top of value, and we built our business based on sweat equity. And slowly but surely, we started off as a manufacturer's representative, and we moved from being manufacturer's representatives to innovative packages of turnkey solutions. So we became a consolidator of other people's equipment. And then over a period of time, we developed technical skills and expertise. And then after that, when we realized that we no longer wanted to be in the hands of the manufacturers, we started developing our own technology. And that's when it really started getting interesting, because then we kind of broke our bonds with everybody else, and we moved from being entrepreneurs into being into startup, into being serious players.
So you were quite a serious player when you started your own manufacturing, but I mean, were there humble beginnings for you in this business too?
They were very humble beginnings. You know, I remember traveling economy class on Uganda Airways and living out of a backpack, and kind of having to pretend that I had some money and borrowing my father's suits, and it was absolutely humble beginnings.
I suppose your training as an actor came in there as well.
Oh, it was absolutely invaluable. It was remarkable how that came in handy.
So you went crisscross the continent with your. And what sort of reaction were you getting at that time?
You know, we were getting a very positive reaction because the rest of the continent understood that South Africa really did have something to add to peace and security and stability on the rest of the continent. But we took a unique approach. The first thing an entrepreneur has to realize in a startup phase, you have to find a unique angle. How could we go against the major defense players in the world without a unique angle? We realized that most of these African governments didn't have sophisticated procurement capability, and they didn't want equipment. They didn't want us to show them a catalog and ask them to choose what equipment they wanted. They wanted solutions to problems. And we created a competence in South Africa that allowed us to go and understand their operational problems, to match the solution to the problem. And sometimes the solution wasn't supplying them anything new, it was just fixing what they had. And then developing a relationship. That was how our business grew. It grew out of many years invested in developing trust and relationships.
But it must be very tough. I mean, one of the things about the government procurement processes across Africa, they can be very bureaucratic, they can be very slow. I mean, I know people in the oil industry, which I know you're also into, who'll go and sit in a hotel for like 6 months sometimes waiting for a meeting.
And that's why not everybody is working in Africa. You know, people often ask us how we deal with our competitors. And sure, we have competitors. But in our business, we don't really have competitors, because that to us is part of what we do. Living with the bureaucracy, which quite frankly is all part of the legacy of colonialism. The bureaucracy in Africa is terrible, but we can thank our history for that. The reality is that once a government sets its mind to something, even though the wheels turn slowly, eventually the project happens, and you have to have the patience and the understanding and the respect for the system in terms of allowing that process to unfold.
Well, just one thought before we go to break here. I remember once in Zambia, one of the immigration officials, I was complaining about the paperwork, and he said, without looking up, well, you're the ones who taught us.
And he was so right.
So right, indeed. All right, hold that thought there. It's time for a short break now. We'll be back with more on the Entrepreneurial Edge. Right after this, we'll be talking about everything from the arms business to Lions rugby team. Do stay with us.